Today, I'd like to introduce you Mr. Richard Gregoryan. Actually, I know that he doesn't need any introducing. He is well known, not only in Armenia, well-known politician and political analyst in Armenia and around the world. And today, I will speak with Mr. Gregoryan about the Armenian elections. What to expect, as you can see from the title of our webinar. And I'd like to start with Mr. Gregoryan asking the question. Actually, just please describe the briefly current situation. How is the situation in Armenia, and what should we expect from these elections?
Well, in a general sense, Armenia is still very much in a state of war in terms of the unprecedented scale of the unexpected defeat in the war for NagornoKarabakh late last year with Azerbaijan. The failure to release all prisoners of war and other civilian captives is tending to prolong and deepen the polarization within Armenia. Having said that, let's turn to the good news. What we do expect in this coming early election to elect a new parliament in Armenia is yet another free and fair election, repeating the same level of democracy in 2018 when current Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan came to power in a non-violent change of government, ushering in a new period of democracy, culminating in free and fair elections in 2018. Therefore, we do expect a repeat of a second free and fair election. And in many ways, this is the risk and the danger. The former corrupt government and former presidents of Armenia are staging a comeback and are using a free and fair election in an attempt to unseat the current government.
Okay, great. You mentioned some names, some candidates. Who has the most chance to win the elections? Actually, is Pashinyan still popular in Armenian community?
Well, in a general sense, despite the decline in popularity, Prime Minister Pashinyan and his government enjoy the highest level of support from Armenian society. The opposition, which is exploiting the unexpected defeat in the war over Nagorno-Karabakh, accusing the government of treason, etc., are struggling to meet the threshold to enter the new parliament. But what we see is an interesting observation. Much of the opposition to the Pashinyan government in Armenia is divided, is fragmented. We have 4 different competing opposition factions, many of which are divided between former presidents of Armenia, and the tension between the opposition is as significant as the opposition's attempt to challenge the government. Moreover, what we see is this fragmentation of the opposition will only dilute and decrease the number of votes against the government, meaning that at the end of the day, what is most likely is the government of Prime Minister Pashinyan will secure a reduced but still working majority, and the opposition will be challenged to enter the new parliament.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, how could you analyze the current relations between Levon Ter-Petrosyan, the first president of Armenia, and Pashinyan? As we know, they were for a long period friends, and now they are rivals. How can you analyze why they became such kind of rivals? Because of Nagorno-Karabakh and following this war events, or there is another thing that we should know?
Well, in a general sense, the current Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is very much responsible for the so-called Velvet Revolution, a rare victory of nonviolence that brought him to power in 2018. But in many ways, Pashinyan became a politician as a supporter and a key assistant of former President Levon Petrosyan, Armenia's first president. Hence, over time, there was a rivalry, a natural, inherent rivalry, almost generational as well. Pashinyan, in many ways, feels he's outgrown Petrosyan. And if we look at all three former presidents, the first president, Levon Petrosyan, and his opposition, Armenian National Congress, has broken with Pashinyan. We have the latest president, former President Serge Sargsyan, who was forced from power from Pashinyan, trying to also oppose the government, but is not in any kind of coalition or agreement with the other opposition. And the most dangerous development, former President Robert Kocharyan, who has aligned himself with the marginal nationalist Dashnad party. He poses the most serious threat to the country. But in many ways, it's Levon Petrosyan as the only candidate in the political campaign giving details of an election program and holding a moderate position regarding NagornoKarabakh and a very moderate position regarding normalization between Armenia and Turkey. But Petrosyan, Sargsyan, and Kocharyan, the three former presidents, are just that, former presidents. They represent very much the Jurassic Park of Armenian politics, dinosaurs, and with little real popularity. And as the Armenian people are not in any kind of ambition to return to the past of corruption and authoritarianism, the opposition remains largely discredited.
Okay, just imagine that 21st of June and the result is known, and Pashinyan again is the Prime Minister of Armenia. How will the Armenian community will react to this election? From my own analysis, I know that the most pro-Pashinyan people are turned against Pashinyan now, and but you say that Pashinyan is still popular among the some part of the community. So, what is there any expectation such kind of revolution, kind of velvet revolution, or against Pashinyan? If 21st of June, Pashinyan becomes Prime Minister of Armenia.
Well, first of all, let's look more objectively at why we think the government is likely to win the election. First of all, although Pashinyan and his government have, let's say, decreased in popular support, much of the opposition against Pashinyan is perhaps overcome and overtaken by fear and hatred of former President Kocharyan and others in the opposition. In other words, for many Armenian voters, it's not a vote in favor of Pashinyan, but it's a vote of a lesser evil. It's a vote away from the more dangerous opposition. And in this way, it seems likely. However, what do we expect? We do know for certain that the day after the election, all of the opposition will cry foul, will protest the outcome. This is what they're good at, yelling and protesting, rather than presenting an alternative policy. What this also means is they're most likely to fail to mobilize any significant number of protesters. This is very much a snap election, an early election, designed to address a deep political crisis and to turn the page and move beyond. So I do think the day after the election, much of the ordinary population, who is sick and tired of all the politicians, will seek a return to normalcy and stability. This gives the government a chance to unify the country and to move forward. But at the same time, the opposition represents genuine, justified frustration with the government of Armenia and the leadership of Nikol Pashinyan. And it's much more than Nagorno-Karabakh. It's the lack of strategic vision and a lack of trust and confidence. And in this way, Armenian politics like American politics, is a choice between lesser evils.
Okay, then let's look to the alternative way. Day after elections, the opposition wins elections, and what will be changed in Armenian political life? Will be positively for Armenia? Your personal view.
Well,
It's
I'm concerned about two specific implications. If the opposition does come to power, whether it's former President Robert Kocharyan or anyone else, the foreign policy framework of Armenia will shift. Armenia will become much more over-dependent on Russia, much more close or subordinate to Moscow, even more than the current government already is. Secondly, it will open the door to a return of nationalism, a hardline policy regarding both Azerbaijan and Turkey, and in terms of foreign policy, a hardline diplomacy, which is probably based on weakness, not strength. Secondly, I'm more concerned with this being a return to the corrupt authoritarian governments of the past, and unfortunately, a season of oligarchs, if you will. And it would imperil and actually reverse years of democratic reform and economic reform since the Pashinyan government came to power. However, I still think it unlikely that will go in such a dangerous direction.
Okay. Of course, you mentioned the foreign policy. Of course, the elections is not only linked to internal affairs of Armenia, but it's also linked to foreign policy of Armenia. Do you think that actually I'm against to call it as a punishment of Pashinyan because we know that Pashinyan was known as pro-Western politician, and there were such kind of rumors, or maybe it is a reality. You know the better. He was supported by Soros outside, in outside media. In foreign media, we have seen, or in Russian media, actually, we have seen a lot of times that this Velvet Revolution was supported by Soros, and of course, you know better than it. Can we say that the last Karabakh war was kind of punishment of Pashinyan's government, which was against Putin's Russia?
I would say
Is there any link?
definitely not. Definitely not. In many ways, what's interesting prior to the war and even today, for the Russian government, the preference is the Pashinyan government. Russia has refused requests for assistance from the Armenian opposition. In many ways, for the Kremlin, Nikol Pashinyan is the trophy of Vladimir Putin, an example of a legitimate, democratically elected leader who is now well within the Russian orbit of control. It's much more beneficial. It's the opposite of Lukashenko in Belarus. It offers Putin an important asset as long as the Armenian government stays within Russian influence. Secondly, George Soros is not a factor in Armenian politics, and the conspiracy theories and the false narrative coming from the Russian media are just noise and distraction. Moreover, the Pashinyan government from the very beginning was very careful about reassuring Moscow and the world that this was not a Maidan moment. This was not about the West versus Russia, and it was not a shift in strategic orientation. What this means is, whether we like it or not, Russia is key regarding Armenia security and Nagorno-Karabakh. And there was a clear demonstration throughout the Velvet Revolution that there were no flags. There was no European or American involvement. So I am a little more confident that the sustainability, the resilience of Armenian democracy remains firm. And for example, there was a time with intense Turkish media interest and Turkish government outspoken support for Pashinyan during a rather comical coup attempt in Armenia by a number of disgruntled army officers. This too only demonstrated the resilience of Armenian democracy.
Okay. Then I'd like to ask, and actually it's interesting me to know, how do you analyze why Russian position was different than earlier positions in the last Karabakh war? Because no one expected that Russia will let Armenia become alone against Azerbaijan in the Karabakh war, because we know that previous clash, not war, but clash, for example, in 2016. There were also a pressure from Russian side to Azerbaijan to stop the conflict in this 4 days conflict. But in last year, this kind of pressure didn't came actually until 8th of November. So what was the change in the Russian relations? How do you analyze?
Well, I think there were two observations. One is, first, what did happen in the 44-day war that was different and significant was direct Turkish support for Azerbaijan militarily. And this was decisive. But what was also equally significant is the point you raised. What did not happen? Russian response. And I do think that Russia made a very prudent calculation based on its own interest in terms of keeping the tactical alliance with Turkey strong, but also seeking and gaining a true victory for Russia in the wake of the war. Russia imposed a ceasefire agreement and for the first time was able to deploy Russian peacekeepers. It is a military presence they never had before, but always wanted for leverage, for power and influence. In this way, Russia is the clear winner from this war. And Russia's treaty obligations are largely to Armenia proper, not Nagorno-Karabakh. And yes, Russia and the Collective Security Treaty Organization has been in danger of demonstrating unreliability when it comes to attacks on Armenia or the presence of Azerbaijani troops. But I think Moscow made a careful calculation. And this is the new post-war reality. Having said that, there is an opportunity in the restoration of trade and transport involving Armenia, Russia, and Azerbaijan, but also involving Turkey. And this is a rare opportunity to try to save and salvage much of the destruction and tragedy of the war.
I agree with you, actually. It is the winner, the most winner is Russia with its military presence in Azerbaijan territories. After 25 years, we know that in 1991, under LCP government, Russia withdrew its troops from Azerbaijan, but now came back again to Azerbaijan territories. I agree with that analysis. And now I'd like to ask the last statement, one of the last statements, which Pashinyan called Western peacekeepers to come to the border on Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Russia was against to this.
No, let me clarify. The Armenian government proposal is not for Western peacekeepers. It's for monitors, not peacekeepers, to be placed on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border, and not from the West, but only from any of the three Minsk group co-chairs, the US, Russia, or France. And it's designed to legally begin a process of border demarcation with Azerbaijan. In other words, it's much more reasonable than any report of a peacekeeping request. Moreover, Russia has not ruled this out and may actually accept it, because Russia is looking now to work with the United States in terms of post-war stability along the border and even in Nagorno-Karabakh, because such Western engagement from the EU and the US will actually legitimize Russia's unilateral deployment of peacekeepers, the opposite of Crimea, and will be based on the respect and recognition that Russia is the primary actor. And don't forget Turkey. Turkey also has gained a significant victory from the war although less than expected, Turkey has regained and reclaimed its lost role as the primary military patron of Azerbaijan. In other words, for many years, Russia had replaced Turkey with Israel in becoming the primary arms supplier to Azerbaijan. Now, however, it is Turkey that has regained that role. So I would also not downplay the Turkish significance in the post-war situation, just as we see this as a Russian victory. But the Armenian government's proposal for international observers is a good way to engage Azerbaijan in a legal commission, formally and institutionally, to demarcate the contested border.
How do you think is there an opportunity for peace actually in the near future? Or do you think that there is a real danger for the new war, which anyone wishes?
Well,
your personal view?
Unfortunately, I'm usually optimistic, but in this context, I'm a little concerned. The outlook for peace is very bleak. The outlook is more for normalization and stability. In other words, the real priority is to prevent the outbreak of renewed fighting, not necessarily peace, but stability. And until the prisoners of war are returned from Azerbaijan to Armenia, it's difficult to move beyond the state of war. Moreover, the Azerbaijani side has been testing the weakness of Armenia and testing the response by Russia in terms of incursions into Armenian territory. And if anything, there's a dangerous escalation that, yes, we could see a war by accident in terms of renewed hostilities. But this is why post-war stability is a priority and accidental convergence of interest between Brussels, Washington, Moscow, and Ankara.
Okay, and I'd like to know your personal view on the role of France, which is, especially since the last Karabakh war, is not popular in Azerbaijan foreign policy. How do you think, is there any bias from France side, which one-sidedly tries to become involved to this conflict? Of course, we know that France is one of the member of this Minsk group, OSCE Minsk group, but actually unexpected or expected the most part of Azerbaijan, France tries again become involved to this conflict. How do you analyze why France supports only Armenia?
Well, to be honest, when assessing and analyzing the French position, which is very outspoken, very bold, and very principled, I see this driven by a deeper geopolitical context. In other words, this is more about the retirement of the German leader, Angela Merkel, and French President Macron's attempt to assume the new position of European leadership. In other words, this is about France regaining a leading role in European foreign policy and security. And it's more driven by that goal of European leadership than it is about Nagorno-Karabakh or Armenia, Azerbaijan. Having said that, the Biden administration in Washington is now re-engaging in the region. And I think the real initiative, the momentum now is from both Washington and Brussels, the European Union, and much less from Paris. So I do expect the French government to retreat from its lead role and play more of a role within the European Union and together with the United States. But at the same time, Macron has recently indicated a willingness to work closer with Moscow in the post-war situation. So this may be a temporary emotion, but it remains to be seen.
Okay, now let's come to the 3+3 format, which directly after the Second Karabakh War recommended by Turkey and Iran. Do you think that it is possible in such current situation?
No.
We know that because from my own analysis, I know that it is hard because Russia-Georgian relations. There is no any diplomatic relations, and 3+3 format means that Georgia and Russia also are involved to this format. But your position, how do you analyze?
It's far too premature. In other words, the idea in principle could come later, but at this point in time, one is, as you have correctly pointed out, the lack of diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia. A second reason is Armenia-Turkey. We don't yet have normalization between Armenia and Turkey, and we don't have diplomatic relations. But the other factor or obstacle is Iran. The nuclear talks have just resumed, fortunately, but Iran is not yet seen as returning as a regional player. So I do think the 3+3 framework is interesting. It's potentially promising, but over the longer term, we're just not there yet.
Okay, then I'd like to ask the question concerning the membership of Armenia to the Eurasian Union. We know that in the last period, for example, there was a pressure from Russian side to make sanctions against the West as a response to Western sanctions to Russia and Belarus. And Russia tries also to make such kind of sanctions against the Western countries within Eurasian Economic Union. And for example, yesterday I read some media reports on Kazakhstan, which Kazakhstan officially declared that they are against such kind of joint sanctions against the West within Eurasian Economic Union. What is Armenian position, if there is anyone?
Well, as you've noted, Armenia was pressured or forced to join the Eurasian Economic Union, and we were forced to sacrifice the association agreement with the European Union. What this means is entering the prison of Putin's Eurasian Economic Union is a dead end economically. But the good news, Armenia generally hides behind Kazakhstan and even Belarus, who do a more determined job at pushing back against Moscow and resisting such efforts. Armenia has also been able to have the United States look the other way when Armenia was trading with Iran. In this circumstance, Russia will also allow Armenia not to join any kind of sanctions against the West, and we will be able to survive. But it's also because of the small size of the Armenian market, to be honest. Now, in terms of Armenia-Turkey normalization, this is an added benefit, where the appeal for Turkey to reopen the border with Armenia, the border is no longer just between Turkey and Armenia, a very small, isolated market. But for Turkey, it's a closed border that could be opened between Turkey and the Eurasian Economic Union, with Armenia as a platform to Turkish exports into new markets. And for the Erdogan government, that's an important consideration as well.
Okay, you mentioned also in your previous explanations that Russia is still key player in Armenian security, and we know that Russia has military bases in Armenia. And during discussions with my Armenian friends in different conferences, I have asked a lot of times. They are well-educated people, pro-Western friends, let's to say. And I asked from them also the same question. Do you really think that if there is no any Russian military in Armenia, is there any danger that Turkey or Azerbaijan will start a new conflict to, let's to say, occupy or to have control other Armenian or violate the territorial integrity of Armenia. Do you think also the same? Because it is I don't believe that there is any wish from Azerbaijan or Turkish side that if there is no any Russian military bases, we should violate territorial integrity of Armenia. Or it is just such kind of the general view that Russia tries to pressure to Armenian community that if there is no Russian military, then Armenia will be in danger from Turkish and Azerbaijan side.
Well, to be honest, I do see a threat, but a little more nuanced. In other words, Russia has long tried to exaggerate the threat from Turkey. And in many ways, for many years, the Russian military presence in Armenia was a Cold War legacy. It was a Soviet and then Russian base along the border with NATO member Turkey. What's changed, however, is a Russian military buildup in southern Armenia that is not about Turkey whatsoever, but about Azerbaijan. And the reason I'm concerned is the precedent. Direct Turkish military support for Azerbaijan during the war in terms of the drone warfare and the Turkish Air Force. But moreover, Azerbaijan, as we speak, is in violation of Armenia's territorial integrity. Armenian territory, sovereign territory, is now in dispute. Armenia no longer controls all of its territory. So in this context, yes, perception is as important as reality. And unfortunately, this is the threat perception. Russia's taking advantage of it, of course. From an Armenian security perspective, Armenia has no alternative. The Europeans are not ready to provide hard security. The Americans are certainly not ready or willing. So in other words, unfortunately, in this fragile post-war situation, we have an insecurity that deepens Russian influence. But analytically, this is why I advocate the necessity to return to diplomacy. We need to resume diplomatic negotiations to make a fragile ceasefire that was imposed by Russia into a lasting peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan over Nagorno-Karabakh.
Okay, I know that you are personally supporter of Turkey-Armenia normalization process. So in the new reality, how do you think that, what should be done for this normalization firstly?
Well, in many ways, what we see is a new scenario where the positive outlook for normalization may be based on two new developments. On the one hand, it may be driven by the close relationship between Moscow and Ankara. Second, it may be in a new domestic political calculation within Turkey, where the MHP and the Azerbaijani lobby in Turkish domestic politics is not as significant, not as powerful. And for the Erdogan government, the economic promise of reopening the border, of trade in transit, may be attractive. Also to counter the Kurdish insurgency, to counter the PKK with stability and jobs, economic stability. And there may be a national security argument. But the first scenario, in terms of an alignment of the stars between Russia and Turkey, may be equally significant. Now, the good news, the Armenian policy has not changed, even from the former government, a policy of no preconditions. We're committed to normalization, which is not reconciliation, but reopening borders and establishing diplomatic relations. It's much more practical, much more prudent. There is no prerequisite, no demand. President Biden's statement on the genocide issue has nothing to do with the Armenian government position regarding normalization. So I am still understanding that it's a difficult process, but we also tend to underestimate how far we have come since the protocol process. And I do think that there is no alternative but normalization.
Okay, now we are coming to the end of our discussion, and I'd like to ask my last questions, actually. How do you see the region, the South Caucasus region, in 5 years, 2025, and we are discussing the situation in South Caucasus. How do you see? What should be changed, or how will it look like, the region itself, in 5 years?
Well, my view is actually a little different than many, because I would argue that the region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey, we were all at war before the war over Nagorno-Karabakh. We were fighting COVID-19, the coronavirus, together. It was a shared threat. The coming challenge for all of our countries together is a shared challenge of economic risk from COVID-19, supply chains, jobs, in Turkey, in Armenia, in Azerbaijan has changed. We need to adapt and adopt more innovative responses. And in this way, the positive opportunity of restoring trade and transport in the region is more important because of the COVID recovery, but also because it gives economics and trade much greater significance as an incentive for stability than ever before. In Turkey, I think Turkey will be challenged to play more of a role in the Black Sea and Black Sea security. And I'm worried about Russia in terms of, in my opinion, the close relationship between Russia and Turkey is very much the aberration. The historical record is much more the natural rivalry. And I do expect tension with Russia to increase. What this also means is a path for Turkey to return to the NATO alliance and to regain the trust of the West in a positive way.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, personally, I wish that day after the elections, we hope that the elections results will bring stability to Armenian community life, and this stability, I believe, that will have a positive influence also to the regional stability. Of course, we all are supporters of peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey. We are against any kind of conflicts in our region, and we hope that we can speak about peace, about the openness of trade and transport routes in our region, and so easily we can move freely between our countries. So thank you very much, Mr. Gregosyan. I believe that we will speak positively in our future discussions on the.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Bye.